Performing a task is one thing. Performing a task in front of 50,000 people is a whole new ballgame. It is, I am that guy, and you know you're that guy because you have all of this evidence to prove it. Suffering is what leads to you having that certainty that you are that person. When you start understanding the way that the world works, you've got to go all the way to the end.
Is there a secret to optimal performance? If so, what is it? All the influencers, mental health experts, doctors act like there's some secret, but is there? Today, you're going to meet someone who might be able to answer that question in an effective way, in an actionable way. Someone that I've had the pleasure of speaking with, getting to know, training with, reading his work, and listening to his seminars. And I'm humbled to call a friend. Today, you're going to meet the founder of Athletic Health, a certified strength and conditioning coach, among 20 other certifications, including the Postural Restoration Institute, which I personally have experience with and has helped me tremendously in my life. And this individual has also worked with organizations like the New York Yankees, the Los Angeles Lakers, and Miami Marlins, if I'm not mistaken. I am so humbled to introduce Mr. Sean Light. How are you today, sir?
Jonathan, thank you, man. What a great intro. You memorized it. True professional.
Well, when you know what you're talking about, it's that much more simple, but it's always easy to speak the facts.
Yeah,
you know
man.
what I mean? And we've gone back and forth, exchanged book recommendations, training protocols, and just methodologies, different things that have worked. And you've talked about this concept of action potential, the potential for action. And I pose a question at the top. Is there a secret to optimal health?
It's certainly like a catchy, marketable way of putting it. And I think for many years, I would have said that there is not. Unequivocally, emphatically, yes, there is absolutely a secret. It is one secret. It is 6 words long. It will be the last thing that I write in the book that I'm currently writing. And it is wildly unexpected. No question, there is a secret.
So how can we start asking ourselves the right questions to answer that particular question?
You've got to look through a different lens when you are asking yourself, well, how am I going to work out? How am I going to eat? What is optimal performance? And I'll tell you right now, people are fooling themselves. I fooled myself. And when I was a kid, I was at a basketball camp, and I loved Shaq. I loved MJ. I loved Allen Iverson. Like, I wanted to be in the NBA. I remember a high school basketball coach from New York City, here in New York City, actually probably super close to here, LaSalle Academy. I know it's somewhere around here. And he had coached Ron Artest, now Meta World Peace, God Shammgod, a couple NBA players, and he was going to give us the secret to how to make it to the NBA. I was like, oh my God. I was 6th grade. And I'm like, this guy's going to actually reveal to me the secret of making the NBA. I leaned in. I was ready to rock. And he was like, if you want to make it to the NBA, you have to work harder than anybody else. If you got to do more, you probably heard the saying, I think it was Bill Bradley, when you're not working, somebody else is. And that really resonated with me. I would think like random kids in Texas were out there training when I wasn't. He was like, you can't go to the beach when you're with your friends. You can't go to the movies with your friends. And I'm in the back, 6th grade Sean, being like, say less, like, done, I'm doing this. And that summer, friends would call me up to go to the beach. And I was like, this is it. This is my moment. And I wouldn't go to the beach. I'd be like, sorry, I can't do it. I'd go outside and I'd do my drills. And then in the winter, friends would call me up, go to the mall, go to the movies. My mind was blown. I was like, this is so easy. So I would go outside, shovel off the driveway, and I would do my drills. And no joke, every single day since I was in the 2nd grade, I was working out multiple hours every single day, trying to make it to the NBA. I was checking the boxes. We were on vacation, and I would find a basketball court at some random strip mall behind there next to a water tower, and I'm out there doing my 2-ball dribbling. And so I did okay in my basketball career. I ended up playing Division I hoops. But eventually I made it to the NBA as a strength coach for the Lakers. And I was dialed in, man. I was like, what did these guys do that I didn't do? And I wanted to see it. And I got to the NBA, and it was the complete opposite. Guys didn't really want to work out. Guys sometimes showed up to the weight room, sometimes don't. I kid you not. I won't say the name, but I had a player walk up to me on my first day with the Lakers. And he was like, hey, are you Sean? Are you the new strength coach? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, just so you know, I've been in the league for like 15 years and I can count on one hand how many times I've worked out. No disrespect to you, but this is just how it's going to be. And I was like, whoa, like that's crazy, because you expect these guys to be the pinnacle of exercise and fitness. And it was the opposite, because, and I know you and I have had the discussion that I was a journalism major in college. I was always looking through a different lens. Like I had no script. I had no routine. I wasn't like referencing page 26 on how to do a lower body workout. I was just like, well, what do we got here? What works? I'm looking at this and I'm like, I'm telling these guys that you've got to do all of this stuff. You've got to, if you want to be an all-star, you've got to follow these corrective exercises. You've got to do exactly what I say, and you've got to do it to a T. And every single person, when I worked in baseball and I worked in basketball, who did everything to a T, the worst players on the team. They were getting cut. They were not elevating levels, right? And all the guys who didn't really do it, who barely, hit or miss, sometimes they were there, sometimes they weren't, sometimes the effort was there, sometimes there wasn't. Those were the guys on SportsCenter. Those were the guys at the All-Star game. And I had to look myself in the mirror and be like, what I'm telling is garbage. This is not true. What I am preaching is incorrect. And I had to go find what the correct source was. And that has led me down a wild path.
I think that the journalism background, I don't know if I said this to you in our previous discussions, but the journalism background, in my view, is such an asset, because you've taken an investigatory approach to your curiosity, where you read hundreds and hundreds of books. You also called yourself out on, your bullshit, if you will. And I've had those similar conversations. I mean, on this podcast, we talk about mental toughness, resilience, forging character through experience, and a big theme is how you look at yourself in the mirror and have those honest conversations. And I think that because you're willing to have that honest conversation with yourself and it sent you down this rabbit hole, look at where you're at now, right? Look at all the other opportunities that it's created. So what'd you find?
Man, this is like the ultimate rabbit hole. And I'll preface this by saying, this is why I open my new book with this. The secret is not lost on me that it is absolutely the hardest thing you will ever do in your life. To accomplish this is your greatest journey. It's not quick and easy. It is not simple. It is it. It is the top of the top. Where it started for me was starting to understand that something was happening here in the brain that was different. And I was very curious about how all the professional athletes that I worked with, they had like a unique way of behaving that was not normal to the outside world. And if you ever find yourself around celebrities or like in the same vicinity of them, what you'll notice is that like the normal people around them are always laughing at what they're doing. They just do like slightly off the wall stuff. Millions of like crazy stories. And every professional strength coach has these same stories. And I also had a very unique perspective because my brother was a first-round draft pick for the Boston Red Sox. So I got to see this, right? I got to see how this worked. And my brother did not like working out. He liked to go out. He liked to party. He had a great college experience. I didn't have a sip of alcohol until I was 26 years old. This guy was not that guy, right? And yet I topped out at Quinnipiac. This guy's standing on the mound at Fenway Park. Like I'm his brother, right? Like we got the same juice, right? So like I started to look at these things and start diving down the road of neuroscience to understand it. And I think a really easy way of letting it resonate with you is performing a task is one thing. Performing a task in front of 50,000 people is a whole new ballgame, right? When I was in college, I shot 46% or something from free throw percentage, which is awful. But if nobody's here and there was a basketball hoop right there, I would drill all 10, right? And I haven't shot a basketball in 2 years. Like I'm looking at the brain as a real limiting factor for a lot of people. And I started pinning that their aloofness, their unique behavior was their greatest asset, because now, of course, they're unicorn talents, right? You could be aloof and, not be talented at all. You're not making it to the NBA. But this was the thing that unlocked the potential, right? They now can go out in front of 50,000 people and not freeze up because their fight or flight system is not overregulated here, right? So then it became the question, I'm looking at myself. I'm like, well, what the hell was wrong with my, central nervous system that I couldn't perform in front of 14 people at Fairleigh Dickinson University, right? I was so nervous. What's the difference? How come my brother wins Louisville All-American? They sent him a plaque and he shoves it under his bed. He can't find the plaque anymore. That was crazy. Anybody who would win an award like that would frame that thing, right? He doesn't care. What's the difference here? So I started really diving down the neuroscience and trying to figure out how you can turn that off. And that is the rabbit hole of rabbit holes.
So I think you know this. I was a criminal prosecutor in the Bronx for
man.
3 years, SVU. And I love standing up when I deliver seminars, keynotes, motivational speak. I love being on stage and training and sharing insight about how to build resilience, mental toughness, and become the best version of yourself. And what sent me down a similar rabbit hole was the butterflies that I got in my stomach. And in law school, I always, before a mock trial or anything like that, I would just find myself freezing up to some degree, even though I'd rehearsed it, I had the cue cards, but when it came time to deliver, my hands would shake. And growing up, I'd do piano recitals and I would sing and I would have to pretend no one was there in order for me to kind of deliver it at my best. I always felt comfortable on stage. I wanted to be on stage, but there was always something kind of holding me back. Yeah. And ironically, where we align is that there is a way to physiologically hack yourself into calming down so you can deliver. And when I hurt my back in 2020, back squatting, had disc protrusions in my lower back, L4, L5, and it just tormented me for months till I got back in touch with an old friend, colleague, physical therapist who was also certified in postural restoration, taught me pelvic orientation and nasal breathing. And at the same time, I was working with victims of domestic violence. At the same time, I was tracking my data on Whoop. At the same time, I was reading all these books, including but not limited to a book I reference often, The Body Keeps the Score. All of these things were happening all at once, and stoicism, where I'm just learning all of these different practices and methodologies around mindfulness, stoicism, nasal breathing, the central nervous system, feeling the physical differences in my body, watching my heart rate go down when I would breathe through my nose. And then when it was time to go back into the courtroom and indict a case or put it in the grand jury or stand up in front of a bunch of people in court on a case that I didn't necessarily know what I was talking about, but doing my best to because I throw it at you at the last second, in the middle of a pandemic, by the way, in New York City, I was calm because I learned how to self-regulate. I learned how to calm myself down.
Sure.
Your experience in diving down this rabbit hole, how have you come to manage performance anxiety and your feelings and help other people manage their pain?
Yeah, man. So I would argue slightly different than what you're saying.
Okay.
I would say that the physiological stuff, the biohacks, I know Huberman does what is it, a physiological sigh or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
You're attacking cells, right? And the systems themselves. Now that has an effect. I won't discredit that, but it can't be the solution because it's not attacking the root. My business, Athletic Health, its logo is the heart. This is the first time I've actually ever told anybody this.
Okay.
The reason that it is the heart is because in ancient Egypt, one of their traditions was that when somebody died, the heart would get weighed against a feather on one of those scales. And the feather was like law and order, the way that you were supposed to live. And if at the end it was even, right? Now this had to be a special feather. But if it was even, then that meant you lived justly, like you were that person. And their philosophy was you can't hide from the heart. I can stand on stage in front of 50,000 people, right? But I can't, I'm exposed now. We're going to learn about who this person is. And if the heart, if the heart outweighed it, which I'm sure happened to many folks against a feather, that meant that you were not going to pass into the afterlife, right? And the reason, the philosophy here is you can't hide from the heart. In my year with the Lakers, I went into that year a massive LeBron James fan. Now, when the schedule came out, I circled on the calendar our first time playing against LeBron. And it was in Cleveland. And the way that it works in the NBA is you're in the weight room before the game with the other team. So I'm licking my chops, man. I'm like, I'm going to be in the same room as LeBron James. Like, I'm stoked. So my role with the team was to get there hours ahead, and Whole Foods would always cater our locker room spread. So I'm in there and I would just set up the spread and make sure that the guys had their food before the game. So in Cleveland, if you can imagine this, right? So the visitors' locker room is in the middle. To the right is the Cavs parking lot, their team parking lot, and to the left is the Cavs locker room, which meant that all of the Cavalier players were going to have to walk past the locker room to get there, or our locker room to get there. So I set up team spread right next to the door because I was like, I'm going to get my LeBron James moment, right? And I set it up right next to the door, and I just chilled in the door frame for I don't know how long, right? Probably an embarrassing amount of time, right? But I had to play cool because I'm in the NBA. So Kevin Love walks by, Kyrie Irving walks by, Tristan Thompson walks by. I don't care, right? I'm waiting for the king. So I'm standing there, I'm waiting, I'm looking. I'm like, man, the vets should be here by now. I don't see him. And then all of a sudden, it changed. The air, the literal air in the hallways of Quicken Loans Arena in Cleveland shifted on a dime. And you know what I thought? He's here. And I don't know why. Some sort of instinctive process in me, I knew it right away. LeBron is here, right? And for the next 30 seconds to a minute, it was like somebody, I swear to God, was taking the dial and turning it up. And there was an energy building in this freaking circular hallway in the bowels of this arena. And I'm like, he's coming down the hallway. I knew it. And then next thing I know, it's a curved hallway. I see photographers walking backwards, click, 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 click. And then LeBron James turns, and I'm up against this door frame. I'm eyeing this guy down. I'm getting a head nod. That's what I wanted. He turns the corner. He's got his shades on. He's got the skull cap, the Louis bag. I mean, he looked as fresh as possible. Everything that I wanted the king to look like, he looked like that. And he turned the corner, man, walks right past me, didn't even know I was there. Didn't even know that the photographers were there. He floated by. But as he turned the corner, I had to peel myself off of this door frame. And I was like, whoa, what was that? How does, this guy had a universe, a gravity of this magnetism, this aura around him. And I remember thinking, how does a human man develop this? So I started putting the pieces together, right? And I'm starting to say, look at my Lakers players, and we don't have LeBron James on the team, but they're NBA players. And they have aura to their own respect, and some have a lot, some have a little, but they're NBA players. They've got it. And what I started to notice was that on my table testing, my range of motion performance testing, there was an aura scale. The people who had the most aura had the smoothest, most buttery tests. And I was like, whoa, what's going on with this aura? Let me figure this out. So now I'm looking at Jim Rohn. I'm looking at Tony Robbins. I'm looking at the self-help people who talk about that stuff. How does somebody do that? Now, this is not the secret, okay? But what I found on how somebody creates that is one final answer, and that is the complete congruency between who you say you are and who you really are, right? And I think about LeBron James. When was the last time that guy walked into a room and didn't think that he was the absolute alpha in that room? Literally, probably never, right? And so you think about all of those experiences, all of the hard work that he's put in, and every single day when he gets up, when his alarm goes off and he gets up, when he goes to do his workout, when he pays $1 million and you look at his squat is crap by all intents and purposes, right? But he's there, he's doing that thing, right? And every time he does that, he just contributes a small little grain of sand into this pile. And then over time, LeBron James has now created and accumulated this Mount Everest-sized pile of undeniable evidence that he is exactly who he says he is. So when that feather and that heart come together, that's going to be even because he is that person. So for you, what I think, aside from the hacks, is now you were chipping in on that pile. You were doing things, whether it was like helpful or not, you're doing these things that are building this pile. And eventually you walk into that courtroom thinking, I'm that guy.
Oh, yeah.
And there's no thought. There's no, am I that guy? It is, I am that guy. And you know you're that guy because you have all of this evidence to prove it. And I think that is how what you described is that process.
I wish and I hope and I know that the listeners right now are feeling this moment because I feel like a crazy certainty. That is one of my favorite premises of all time, that you have enough evidence that you stack that it'd be unreasonable for you to question.
Yes.
Right? Like you start to realize that with all the things that you've done, you are exactly who you say you are, that congruency like you talk about. And I've found that in my experience, I've needed to do super hard things to substantiate what I believe to be true, but I didn't necessarily have the evidence to support it. So I would get these crazy feelings of imposter syndrome and not know all of the things that I hoped were true. And so physical fitness has really helped me shape that identity for myself, whether it's the 1,018 push-ups in an hour, 1,018 pull-ups in 4 hours, the recent 58-mile ultramarathon a couple months ago. Like those, I put myself in this completely different club of the 1,000, 1,050 that no one even knows exists or cares, but I needed to do things that put me on a path to believe in myself. And when you talk about this magnetism, this aura, I mean, when did you kind of get on the other side of the fence and realize you are who you say you are? Maybe someone right now is kind of struggling with that and, they can't find the evidence for themselves. I always say go out and create it, then go write it down. And I have different practices, exercises around it. But in your experience, working with professional athletes and high performers, optimal performers, and everything that you've studied, written, practiced, when did you find yourself getting to the other side?
I have always been unique, and my family's listening to this right now. They will confirm that. And I've always kind of marched to the beat of my own drum. And I think that has benefited me quite a bit. I have no issue. I remember when I was in, I think it was like 5th grade, Backstreet Boys were super popular. And somebody came up to me in school like, Sean, I heard you like the Backstreet Boys. Is that true? And I was like, yeah. And they were like ripping me for this. And I was like, they're awesome. Like, what are you talking about,
Didn't
right?
age
Like,
well for those people.
right. So I've always never really had much of an issue being defiant and standing and dealing with that stuff. So that has been helpful for me. But one of my favorite, man, what a quote this is success leaves clues, and boy does it. So the painting of creation on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Do you know what I'm about to say? But somewhere in the social media, we'll paste this picture on top. The great picture, Michelangelo painted God like creating Adam, and he's reaching out. Everybody knows this, right? They can picture that, right? Well, I think it was in the 80s, an OBGYN from Indiana, random, right? OBGYN from Indiana looks at this thing and goes, man, looks like God is encapsulated in a brain. So he pulls up the brain, pulls up the anatomy, he looks at the thing side by side, and it is anatomically exact. Like if you see what's around him, it is the anatomical exact replica of the human brain. So they started looking at other things, and they found other of Michelangelo's paintings, I think in the Sistine Chapel as well, that also have exact central nervous system replications. And people would say, how would Michelangelo know? Well, first of all, the dude was not just a regular guy who they hired off Upwork to make a painting on the ceiling. This dude was a freaking genius. He's also been an anatomist. He was a dissector. He was dissecting tons of cadavers since he was young. So this guy would know what the brain looked like. This is not unintentional. This is intentional. So I look at somebody like that, right? And I look at somebody who's a real genius. And I've always erred towards philosophies that have stood the test of time. And this is obviously a long period of time here. And my interpretation, this is an interpretation, but my interpretation is that what Michelangelo is trying to show is that God, the divine, the intuition, all of that stuff is breathed into you from God through your brain. So I think in here, your thoughts is where the answer lies, right? So then if that ultimately is the case, and think about this, right? Like we're having a conversation of thoughts standing in front of in a trial, and it's that's the thing, and this is the thing that you're rectifying. That's what LeBron James was doing in the previous example. It's here. You've got to reckon with what's happening in your brain, your mind, your thoughts. That has to be dealt with. So you think about today's society. I can't tell you how many people come into my office, and I'm like, how much time per day do you spend with just your thoughts? And I can't tell how many people are like, this is zero. Like it's the moment that I shut my eyes at night. That's the first time I'm alone with my thoughts. No wonder people can't sleep. We have a 2 million-year-old fear machine in our brain that is going to try to keep you safe. And the path of least resistance, the automatic is going to be fear, doubt, procrastination, anxiety, self-doubt, like all that's going to be the first thing that the brain goes from. Yeah, it's the demons. That's how you're designed. So if you don't deal with it, that's what's coming as soon as you shut your eyes at night. I interviewed a sleep scientist years ago, and he told me that the number one reason that for insomnia is because it's the first time all day people are coming to terms with their thoughts, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between, right? So for me, I've got to find time every single day to listen to what's happening here. I've had some wild intuitive experiences in my life. I mean, just cannot paste it as coincidental. Like this is real. There are answers here. And if you never utilize this, you can't get it. So for the advice to those people is you have to think. Those thoughts that just seem to pop out of nowhere, that's the thing, right? And everybody hopes for this like lightning bolt of an idea. Like, oh, that's it, right? It's not. It always slips quietly in the back door and waits to see if you notice it. And if you take action on that, that's the thing. And then if you follow that arrow, if you follow that path, and it's going to be, you're going to be in the void. You're going to be unknown. You're like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. We talked about this right before the show. You just keep chipping, putting stuff into that pile. And eventually you reach the tipping point and you walk into a room and it's, I am that guy. And you feel that.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Inspired. My name is Jonathan Cohen, and I have a quick favor to ask you. If you're getting any value out of this content, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. You help us reach more people, and you can also stay up to date with all the latest content coming your way. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's so empowering to want to put people in a position to control and actively listen to their thoughts, because every day I wake up, I run 40, 60, however long, hour and a half, or once in September, 10 plus hours of no headphones, no distractions, straight up like letting my thoughts bounce off the walls and doing its thing. And I've had some crazy quote unquote shower thoughts. And, there's this sentiment that I came across the weekend that I met you. Don't follow passion, follow energy, because passion can lie to you. And we're talking about energy right now. It's this kind of feedback loop where on one side, people get super insecure if there's criticism that's thrown their way about things, because it's kind of amplifying truths that they don't want to be true but can't deny. And then at the same time, if they just take the time to get to know themselves and listen to those thoughts, let them kind of bounce off the walls, eliminate the distractions, and not go to sleep for the first time listening to your thoughts that day. It's almost like I always kind of see the running as taking my medicine. For some people, it's meditation, it's yoga, whatever the modality or the medium. But you have to take that time to get to know yourself. And I find that getting to know myself in moments where I'm doing really hard things, that's where I'm forging my character, reminding myself of who I am, establishing who I am. And like you said, chipping away. I mean, one of my favorite sayings, Michelangelo, I saw an angel in the marble, so I carved it out. And I believe that as a personal development sentiment, right? Like we're all this big piece of marble, and every single day we wake up chipping away at that marble, trying to become that angel. And we have the opportunity to go and shape that art. We are the art. And you shape it by having those hard conversations, listening to those thoughts, creating that congruency between who we say we are and who we actually are, to your point. I was going through a couple of chapters that you sent me. Viktor Frankl is a big influence on the both of us. What is it about suffering and the neuroscience, neurochemistry? How do those two come together?
I don't know that I would know the neurochemistry process there, but suffering is what leads to you having that certainty that you are that person, going through those difficult things. And, I tell a lot of my clients this. It is almost as if we are pointing our ship to a destination where suffering does not exist. Like we're all like constantly tweaking a turn. If I could just get this done, like I'd be all good.
Yeah,
right? Like, I wouldn't have to worry about it. But life is the yin and the yang, right? Like that's just the way the cookie crumbles out here, right? So there's always going to be the good and there's always going to be the bad. And a great Tony Robbins quote is, your biggest problem is that you think you shouldn't have any. I always wonder, I'm like, what does Jeff Bezos worry about? What does Elon Musk worry about, right? And talk about like people trade up for problems. They have different levels. And ironically, I like came up with this like hierarchy of like what I suspect people worry about. Like I've noted that I work with a couple of billionaires. They are just like super locked in on health. And I don't know a lot of them, but it seems like when you conquer the finance thing, you just get super dialed. It's like Brian Johnson, right? I was watching that documentary last night. Like that guy's just super dialed in on health now, right? So like what happens when you conquer health? Like what's the next step? And I think spirituality and if you look at like television shows and movies, like there's always that meditative, spiritual, barefoot billionaire. They have the Zen yoga like persona in these films. So I think that probably lends itself to be the case. Yeah. And then like, at the end of the rainbow, I think that's probably where the spirituality is. I think like probably in between is relationships and like how like we want to reconnect with my son or whatever it is. Evident, one of my clients brought up, he's like, dude, you just recited Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah. And I had heard of it, but I didn't know what it was. And it really lined up nicely. So I do think it's that, but to your point, the suffering is that it is creating that certainty. And, when you go for your morning 5, you and I both shared our workouts here this morning, and doesn't it just feel nice? Like, don't you feel like you just got your shit together here? That plants that seed, right? When you don't do it, when you snooze, when you don't do it, you're sitting here and I may not notice it, right? But you're like, I'm not that guy. Whereas right now we're both sitting here going, I'm a freaking beast.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a beast. And I think that's where the suffering comes in.
And it's interesting because there's a couple of things I want to bring up. My favorite definition of resilience is suffering strategically managed. It's something that has guided my investigations, my curiosity the last few years, and it's how I've approached each of the challenges that I've done. Piece by piece by piece, strategically managing my suffering. It's a definition that comes from The Art of Resilience by Ross Edgley. I don't know if I've told you about Ross. Ross is one of my biggest fitness influences and probably my biggest influence when it comes to how I've gone about my training and taking the approach that I have when it comes to, he quote unquote identifies or presents himself as a stoic sports scholar. So he does these crazy challenges of like swimming around Great Britain in 6 months without ever setting foot on land.
What?
Towing a mini truck the length of a marathon. He climbed a rope as many times as it took till he scaled the height of Mount Everest. Like he's swam in lakes for like 48 hours. Like he's done like crazy, crazy stuff. Ice swimming, like you name it, he's done it. And savage athlete, wrote like 3 books. One day you're coming on the pod, Ross. It's one of those things that definition has guided my approach in my fitness, but also in my personal life, how I've handled any kind. You don't wish for a life of no problems, you wish for a life of good problems, right? And so you're talking about, wondering what these high optimal performers, wealthy individuals deal with. I mean, I was talking to a startup executive earlier today where like, they're just so concerned about the success of their particular thing that it could potentially lead to panic attacks. And that simply comes down to basic mindfulness of you're focused on the wrong thing. You're not focused on the next action that you can take, and you're just kind of going into that infinite loop of, this won't work, or I can't control this or that. You have to bring yourself back to center of what's just the next thing that I can do. When it comes to cultivating resilience and managing your suffering, how have you approached it?
Managing my suffering. It's just, I don't know. I don't know that I've ever had an issue with it. I would say that the challenge for me, I will say that the true challenge for me is really telling you what I think. Not like the speak my mind, say I don't really like this guy. It's not like that. It's like, and I don't know that other people have this. I assume that they do, but I have I'm a really deep thinker. Like the other day, I spent 9 hours in thought, just in quiet in my apartment. Here's a great example. So right now I read the Bible. And the reason I do so is not for religious purposes, but so many of the greats just reference it. And I got to the point where I was I saw it referenced so many times that I was like, is the Bible the greatest self-help book of all time? And I don't know, right? I just picked up the Quran the other day, right? I want to read these religious texts, these books that are so great and have stood the test of time, right? It makes me nervous to talk about the Bible because I don't know how people are going to react. And there's people of different faiths, and there are people that have, they got their back up against the wall anytime you mention faith or religion or anything like that. And I understand that. I know I'll lose people. The first quote of my second quote of my new book is a chapter from Matthew, or a quote or a passage from Matthew. I've just gotten to the point where I've gone far enough down this path, and I just didn't quit, right? I just kept going because I believed in myself. I believed that I was onto something here. And I'm just at the point now where I feel like I have to say it, and I'm nervous about it. I'm scared to bring it up to old buddies of mine, old basketball buddies of mine. But I was reading the Bible on the way to here because what I've come to the conclusion is that all of the answers are in there, and the path is outlined in there. And I'm not speaking from a religious perspective. I'm just speaking from blueprint, baby, right? I think it's in there. And I guess the best answer I've got for you on there is I just kept going. And I got to the point where you could kind of see that having faith is, you got to go. Of course you don't believe, right? And you get broken enough times where you get down to it and you're just like, I got nothing. And it forces you to have faith. You're either going to quit it or you're going to have faith. And if you keep going, for some reason, those are always my biggest successes when I'm at rock bottom. And I'm like, God, don't send me back there. But that's where it happens, right? And you start to pick that stuff up. And, I'm sitting here on the verge, and I've got my Home Far Away project that I'm going to write. And it is a complete departure. I'm telling you what I think. It is a story. It's not like a step by step. This is weird. It's different, right? It makes me nervous to write this out there. But it's what I really think. And I've just gone down the path enough to know that it is having faith in the brain, the thoughts, the real thoughts there, having faith to push through that. And then you don't know. I have no idea. I have no idea. And people might read this book and I have no idea. I have no clue. That's one of the great conclusions. And on that note, if you read the Gospels, right, they talk Jesus is the great teacher. Just the only message he teaches is have faith, right? That's the only thing he talks about. O ye of little faith. Your faith has healed you. Again, not religious, but if this guy, I would say that this guy knows how to assemble an audience. I would say that this guy knows how to give a message, right? It's the only thing he talks about. It's the only thing he talks about. I'm like, all right, well, here we go.
I think when it comes to spirituality, people wrestle with the demons that they have about how when it comes to that particular conversation, it makes them uncomfortable because they don't have it figured out for themselves. They don't necessarily know what they believe. They may not have conviction,
Sure,
or have too much conviction to the point where you can't reason or be open-minded enough. I find that I always respect what anyone ever believes, and I'm always willing to have a conversation. I have conviction in my faith. I spent 2 years as an infantry combat soldier in the Israel Defense Force, and for me, like, my conviction with God, and I never really get spiritual on the podcast, is very rooted in my experience in my own life, where I did the David Goggins challenge, added 2 miles at the end, 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours. And in the 9th run, I was broken, like physically just done. And I had a very spiritual experience where I was doing it in memory of my grandmother who had passed away on my birthday a couple weeks earlier. And I looked up and I was like, Grandma, please help me. Like, I was crying in the middle of a run. I was sleep deprived. We raised over $15,000 towards curing Alzheimer's through research, because both my grandmothers had died from Alzheimer's, and I wanted to do something actionable. I didn't want to just like donate logistics or beds. I wanted to do something that I felt could change the narrative. And so curing Alzheimer's through research was what I decided to go forth with. And on that 9th run, going up a hill, I swear by God that I felt a force on my lower back just propel me up that little bit, ever so gently. And my life since then, my discipline, as disciplined as I was, as resilient as I was at the time, like, my life just hasn't been the same since, because there's this like crazy sense of certainty, and like, you really may only get one experience with God. Mine just happened to be that spiritual experience. And for me, in my own internal world, like, I can't question it, like, and I don't really want to question it. And that's what gives me so much conviction around my faith and my principles. And I think going back to listening to those inner thoughts about the internal world, like, you have to get to know yourself, and having fear of judgment around other people will prevent you from exploring what you really believe and finding what your convictions truly lie in, and identifying that congruency, right? Going back to your earlier point around who you are and who you say you are. So, you have this awesome practice. You've written these books, and thank you for an autographed copy, by the way.
Of course.
I want to kind of take people on the journey of how they can start to identify that congruency for themselves. So let's give people something actionable that they can put into practice, maybe right now or in their own time, to explore their inner world. Okay. How would you guide a patient, a client, an athlete down that path?
I'm glad you asked this, because like around the new book, My Home Far Away, I will not reveal the secret publicly, because you have to go on the journey with me. I think that's the only way you'll actually learn it. And I haven't totally decided what else around it that I will reveal. So since I haven't decided yet, I'll reveal it. So the title of the book is called My Home Far Away. Do you know what that is? If I said, the radio reminds me of my home far away, do you know what that is?
Still nothing.
Okay. So it's a lyric from John Denver's Take Me Home, Country Roads.
Okay. Oh, wow. I love that song.
Yeah, it's a great classic, right? So when I was a kid, my dad is from West Virginia. He's born and raised mountaineer, right? And I remember being a kid, sitting on the couch with my dad, and we were watching West Virginia. It was fall afternoon. You know how they do. They have a little intro before the game. Who the announcer was, but he comes on and he's like, welcome to Morgantown, West Virginia. And this part of the country, they love God, family, and mountaineer football. And today, not necessarily in that order. And then they flash to the stadium, and he was like, if you're lucky, you're one of the 60,000 people who have a seat today to watch the Mountaineers take the field. And I was like, whoa, like this. And I remember seeing the pictures pop up of the players. I can still remember Grant Wiley, right? So nobody's just probably a regular guy now. But like, that was like a huge moment for me, and forever. Like, I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was about that moment, but it hooked me. right? When I go to, I'm just a diehard West Virginia fan. I'm just a glutton for punishment. But for whatever reason, it's just got my heart. It's got my soul. And I just had my bachelor party. And guess where my bachelor party was? By God, West by God, right? We were down at West Virginia, watched West Virginia play Penn State. And it's the best possible bachelor party for me. Like when the band comes on the field, this is weird, but the band comes on the field, I get chills, right? The team comes out, like I'm euphoric. It's like crazy. I don't get it, but like that's me, right? That's who I've been ever since that I was a kid. Where I'm trying to lead everybody to get to that end point is to get to my home far away. And I think long term, I'd like to have like a conference in Morgantown once a year, like a pilgrimage to get back there, right? And I think the end point is the starting point. I think you've got to think about what are the things that you liked as a kid? What were the passions and the pursuits that you had when you wanted to be a fireman or a Power Ranger or whatever it is that you wanted to be as a kid? I think you've got to go back there. And I think you've got to start. That's the starting point, right? You may not end up being a Power Ranger, but you may end up somewhere unique, right? You will likely end up somewhere unique. Before life got in the way and you had responsibilities and bills and challenges and life has just kicked you in the teeth as it always does. Before all of that happened, you were somebody. Right. And I think that's who you were meant to be, or at least that was your calling in the beginning. So for me, it's going back and exploring that. And it's not hiding from the fact that when West Virginia's band does their little simple gifts thing and the team's about to come out, like I tear up. I don't know why. That's weird, but that's what happens, right? So like I go back to that and then that's where I start exploring and then I'm thinking and I go here and then I go there. Nope, that wasn't right. We were talking about this, right? And it's the path. That is the path that every great has ever followed to get to wherever it is that they want to go. They just have listened along the way and they weren't afraid to be weird or uncomfortable or strange. And that's what I would say, as I would say, you've got to go back there and you've got to find out what that thing is, right? And then now you take your first step.
It's almost like a version of inner child work to a degree where you get to know that younger version of yourself and trust that intuition and let that guide you.
I think we'll take this full circle because we think about where we started this episode and we say, we're talking about the secret to health. And now we're talking Jesus. Now we're talking Bible. Now we're talking about your childhood traumas and whatnot, right? Like we're around the corner here, right? But think about those NBA players when I first started making this discovery and I started going down the path of my own, right? Which was ultimately, how am I going to get to the NBA myself? Those NBA players, think about their development, right? They wanted to play basketball as a kid. And it just so turned out that they are unicorns. They got it. They got the sauce. And all of these guys, when they played in their first travel team, they killed it. They went to high school. No resistance, right to varsity, right to starter, killed 30, 40. Here comes all the scholarships, right? Oh my God, everybody's recruiting. John Calipari's in my school, right? It's all the best ones, right? Then they go to the next level, right? And then they're killing it at college. They play 1 year and the media is saying, you're going to get to the NBA, right? Then you get drafted, your first round pick, you get right to the NBA. They've never had any challenge, right? And I'm sure they've had challenges, but like from a basketball standpoint, they can maintain that certainty that they are that person so that brain does not get in the way. In baseball, you'll see somebody get the yips, right? Somebody can't throw anymore. The armor's cracked. Now they have doubt. Now they wonder. Now they have a big piece of evidence that they might not be that person. And once you cross that threshold, because we've all crossed that threshold, there's no biohack, there's no easy fix. That's why this is your greatest journey. This is why it's the hardest thing you will ever do in your life. Because once you cross that barrier, and now you know the repercussions and the consequences to your actions, and that I can't just be aloof and crazy and do what I want to be a Power Ranger and still be a lawyer, right? When you start understanding the way that the world works, you've got to go all the way to the end.
Let's talk about those gremlins. Doubt, procrastination, anxiety. How can people conquer those gremlins?
One at a time, baby. One at a time. I mean, truly conquering them, you're face to face, nose to nose with them every single day. And I think it is unreasonable to expect you to win all of those battles. I lose those battles, and I think that you just pick yourself up. You go again. It sucks, man. There's all sorts of fear and doubts and procrastinations and anxieties that exist in this world. That's just the way that it is. And, eventually you come to the conclusion that all the greats in the world have not cowered down, right? I think that people are addicted to certainty and they're immobilized by the lack of it. And if you name any great, they have not, the reason they're great is because they stood face to face with fear, doubt, procrastination, anxiety, and they just kept going. They took massive action in the face of those gremlins. I think as you're building yourself, you're going to lose some of the battles. And then it's like, okay, how do I make it easier on myself? I just bought this thing on my phone. It's called the Brick. Have you heard of the Brick?
No.
You put a little magnetic tile on your fridge. You tap it when you leave in the morning, and it locks your phone. You can't go. You can't access it. You can only access like vital apps. And the only way you can unbrick your phone is when you go home. The compulsion to check Instagram throughout the day, you just can't do it, right? So brick your phone, right? And you find these little things and things that work for you. And I've tried every hack. I've tried every strategy, and most of them are useless. But when you keep trying and looking at new things, I'm sure if you and I had a conversation, sat down at a coffee shop and listed all of the strategies that we once tried, it would be forever, man. We need a 7-hour podcast to cover them all, And so I think the strategy is the path. You come face to face with it, and you're like, all right, I guess we're just going to throw it out there and see what happens. And then ultimately, like you said, some stuff sticks, some stuff doesn't stick. That's okay. We just keep going, and eventually you find your voice. I think that's where I'm kind of at in my journey, right? I've had these thoughts for a long time, but I have enough accumulated evidence to be able to sit on this podcast and know that random people, strangers are going to hear this, and I can tell it anyway.
Sean, I've had an awesome time here today. I know the audience got a ton of value out of this. There's a question that I pose to all my guests that I'm not going to pose to you. If the future version of yourself from 10 years from now were to fly in and offer you some advice in order to get there, what do you think he would say to you?
Just keep going. That's it. I think about that on what I would tell, like what advice would I give to my younger self to avoid the heartache? The heartache is the thing, right? And it sucks. I remember reading that in Think and Grow Rich, and they were talking about how great failure is. I'm like, save it. I don't want it. But for me to give myself advice to avoid the heartaches would mean that I would likely not be sitting here. I would certainly not be able to deliver conviction in my message, and I would not be the man that I am. 10 years, I have a vision of what that man might look like. If the message that I would tell, I'm sure it will be the same, is just keep going.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sean Light, please let the audience know where they can keep up with your journey.
Yeah, so I think the best thing that you can do is go to myhomefaraway.com. And on there, I am releasing this book as I'm writing it. And I know that you probably are chomping at the bit to know what this secret is. And listen, you've got to go on the journey with me, but I'm going to reveal it in the only way that I know how. So it is all for free. I'm releasing it as I write it, and I'm also recording the audio book version of it as well, so you can listen to it on both audio, and then you can read it as well. I will give you one parting hint on what that secret actually is, and I think that it is the best thing that you can do to take this journey with me is watch what I do, not what I say.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. Pleasure to have you.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Once again, my name is Jonathan Cohen, and this is Inside the Inspired.